Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, Haley Stevens and I introduced the Protect Taxpayer Data Act. This is a very simple but tragically and urgently necessary bill to address the hack of the U.S. Treasury payment system by Elon Musk and his band of IT goons last week. This bill would limit the Secretary of the Treasury's ability to give access to the payment system only to people who A, have a top-secret security clearance, B, have no conflicts of interest, C, are not special government employees, and D, have been federal employees for at least a year. So why is this necessary? Well, because what happened last week comprised one of the most significant breaches of privacy and threats to our national security perhaps ever. I'm not exaggerating. And this was done with the consent of Treasury Secretary Casten. This point is important because some of my colleagues across the aisle have suggested that somehow what they're doing is just normal diligence. This is decidedly abnormal. It is so abnormal, in fact, that when David Lebrick, the Fiscal Assistant Secretary of the Treasury and former acting Secretary of the Treasury, refused to grant access to Elon Musk, Mr. Casten fired Mr. Lebrick so that Musk could force his way in. Now let's understand the scope of what happened. The Treasury Department manages a $5 trillion a year federal payment system. This is the way that every branch of government pays their bills. Like any accounting system, it's critical that all the bills it pays are approved, legal, and accurately recorded in our ledger. This is how we make payments on savings bonds and other debt borrowed by the United States. It's how we pay employees. It's how we pay contractors. It's how we provide foreign aid. It's how we pay tax refunds, veterans benefits, and Social Security reimbursements. It's how we distribute money to our intelligence agents and to intelligence assets who are embedded in hostile foreign governments. Take control of this system and you can quite literally destroy the United States. To put it mildly, it's a target for our adversaries. And yet last week, unvetted, unelected, and unconfirmed individuals using insecure software and hardware hacked into that system. Did they tamper with the code? Did they manipulate payment systems to prioritize payments to companies controlled by Mr. Musk? Did they inadvertently use hardware that had been infiltrated by our allies? Did they take classified information with them on the way out that could make they themselves a security liability? As we sit here right now, we don't know the answers to any of those questions. All we have is denials from the hackers. But on what basis should we trust them? Because after all, they forced their way into the system with the full consent of someone who lied to his wife, was convicted of 34 counts of fraud for lying to financial and election regulators. As the saying goes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me every single time, shame on me. I would suggest that we should instead trust what this individual said when he was on the campaign trail, when he promised to enact revenge on his political enemies. Trump and Musk now have information that they could use to identify individual taxpayers who, I don't know, contributed to a charity that they oppose for selective retribution. If they got control of the stop payment controls, they could now block congressionally mandated payments for health care, roads, and bridges to governors or attorneys general who are currently suing to block their unconstitutional actions in the courts. With the personal information that they've hacked into, they could go after judges who have forced them to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in penalties after being convicted in jury trials of fraud, defamation, or of companies who compete with one of their many private entities. And as long as those risks remain, we have to assume that this is going to make every single American less likely to trust that they can provide their personal information to the United States government. To put it bluntly, what they did last week compromised the full faith and credit of the United States. If the president and Elon Musk were acting under the direction of a hostile foreign government, this is exactly what they would do. Now, I'm not saying that they are. I don't know. What I'm saying is that if their actions serve only to weaken the United States, That is at the benefit of Russia, China, Iran, and all the other countries that my colleagues across the aisle claim to love less than the United States. A functioning Congress would provide oversight. A functioning Congress would be subpoenaing witnesses and demanding public testimony. A functioning Congress would be treating this like the five-alarm fire that every American understands that it is. And yet here we find ourselves, knowing only that the Republican leadership is completely unwilling to fulfill their oath to defend our country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Unwilling to protect the prerogatives of the House. Now, I hope that I'm wrong, but my fear is that they are a lost cause. Which brings us to my bill with Congresswoman Stevens. I know that there are Republicans in this body who love our country. There are Republicans in this body who I truly love and enjoy their company, and I know that they have told me privately that they are offended and ashamed by what Donald Trump is doing to it. Some of you have even called it out. All it takes now is for 3 of you to stand up to ensure that these last 22 days are an anomaly in our history rather than the beginning of its end. So for any Republicans watching who are, shall we say, democracy curious in this moment, who privately acknowledge that this has gone too far, but worry about the political and worse, personal threats that will surely come to you if you stand up to Donald Trump, I leave you with the empathy and the wisdom of Thomas Paine. These are the times that try men's souls. Many will in this crisis shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Because tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. To my Republican colleagues, the times have found us, and America needs you. Thank you, and with that, I yield to my esteemed colleague and co-author of this bill, Haley Stevens. Wherever you like.
Well, thank you to my colleague, the gentleman from Illinois, for his remarks, his dedication to this chamber, to this process, to the lawmaking. We are both in our 4th term, and certainly thank you, Mr. Speaker, for obliging us the time in the grand discourse of our democracy. It has always been a delight to work with Mr. Casten, a longtime member of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, a dedicated member of the Financial Services Committee, and a thinker, to say the least. And when we came together last week to introduce H.R. 1101, the Taxpayer Data Protection Act, I actually don't think that that piece of legislation was on our mind until we witnessed the very troubling, concerning, and questionably legal actions of an unelected bureaucrat, billionaire, appointee, going into the Bureau of Fiscal Service to get access to the wires and the information of our taxpayers to do God knows what with. And all of a sudden, the phones of members of Congress are ringing off the hook. What is going on? I couldn't take 2 steps in my beloved Oakland County in Michigan, southeast Michigan, the district of which I'm so proud to represent, without somebody asking me in deep concern what was going on. Now, I mentioned Mr. Casten's background, which was also tied to business and certainly tied to the workings of our Congress, but I happen to be a former Treasury official, okay? I went into the Treasury Department as a political appointee in the early days, right after an oath of office was taken, in the early days of President Barack Obama's administration, because I was a part of this auto rescue team. It was actually a real crisis in this nation, what we were looking at, for the kids watching back home, I don't know how old they are, and how much they would remember, but we had a great recession going on. We had double-digit unemployment. We had a financial services sector rocked. We had an insurance market that was practically crumbling. Housing, the subprime mortgages, up the wazoo. It wasn't for sale signs in front of people's homes. And then there was the question about what was going to happen to General Motors and Chrysler, because they were staring liquidation in the face. Now, this Congress, in a different session at a different time, almost in that lame duck period before President Obama took office, this Congress passed something known as the Troubled Asset Relief Program to stabilize, to ameliorate, to address, to make sure that our economy didn't roll off a cliff. And the Main Street effort of the Troubled Asset Relief Program was this effort to save General Motors and Chrysler from liquidation and millions of jobs across this country, including 200,000 in Michigan. They all came into the Treasury Department, from the smallest of suppliers to the mayors to the auto dealers, small businesses in their own right, even the foreign original equipment manufacturers. Do not let them liquidate. So we used $80 billion of taxpayer money, which, by the way, was repaid, which, by the way, worked, which, by the way, rebounded the U.S. auto industry. Did you hear that point again? That we made money off of that $80 billion as a federal government to save General Motors and Chrysler. Now we have a strong manufacturing economy, true innovation happening, producing and making cars at a rate that was unfathomable at that time over 15 years ago. And never once, by the way, did we ever question or seek to knock on the door of the Bureau of Fiscal Service, which is off campus, by the way. It's not in the main Treasury building. We had bipartisan emergency workers. We had people from the Bush administration stay on. We had people from the Obama administration coming in. And we were trying to save this country from falling off a cliff. We were trying to save us from a true Great Depression. And no one was meddling in the wires. So Casten and I have to write this bill, the Taxpayer Data Protection Act, to put up and remind ourselves of guardrails. But the painful point of this is that we are waiting and eager and just wondering when our colleagues, who don't even seem to be in this chamber right now, when the heck are they going to give us the bill to lower the price of goods? We're waiting. I had a meeting in my district on housing. Okay, I brought all the stakeholders together. We've got beautiful homes in Oakland County, Michigan, but we don't have enough of them. We've got homes that need to be rehabbed. We've got building that needs to happen. So I brought together, as members of Congress do, all the stakeholders. And I brought them together. And we invited HUD. But you know what? Per a new administration order, HUD can't go to meetings. So we can't even have a conversation about how the heck we're going to lower the price of housing and get more housing done. Then, the other thing my constituents are talking to me about on overdrive are the eggs. There are no eggs. We don't have eggs. There are eggs, but there's shortages, Mr. Speaker, on the eggs. People are going to the store, they can't find eggs. There was a headline last week in Pennsylvania that $40,000 of eggs were stolen. Just again yesterday in Washington State, more eggs are stolen. I see this commander-in-chief doing all of these press conferences about every revenge and tactic and different type of endeavor for the federal government. What are we doing about the costs? What are we doing about the cost of everyday goods? An executive order comes out about the prescription drugs that are again about to skyrocket, rolling back what we did to lower the cost of prescription drugs and put the Medicare at the negotiating table. This is unbelievable. And so, yes, this is a simple bill and a simple measure to protect the American taxpayer, to reestablish trust. Yes, as duly elected members of Congress, the stewards of the public trust, as quoted and delivered by the great Henry Clay, otherwise known as the great compromiser of the 1800s, we're the holders of the trust. So this bill is a matter that should just be done tomorrow. We should get this done. And then you know what? We are waiting for the leadership of this very body, those who move the bills to the floor, to give us something that will actually help the pocketbooks of the American people. Thank you, and I give the time back to the originator of this special hour order.
Thank you. Yield to the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Stansbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's Tuesday afternoon. I'm here on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, and my question is, where are my Republican colleagues? There's not a single one of my Republican colleagues here on the House floor. In fact, I am standing on the Republican side of the aisle, and there's not a single one in the chamber right now. While Donald Trump and Elon Musk and their group of teenage hackers are dismantling the federal government, not a single one is to be found here on the House floor this afternoon. So let me say to the American people, this is not normal. What is happening right now in this country is not normal, and Democrats are fighting back. We are fighting to defend the Constitution, the rule of law, the separation of powers, vital funding for our communities, the health and safety of our people, and saving our democracy, because what is happening in this country right now is not normal. Over the last 3 weeks since Donald Trump took office, federal agencies have been dismantled. Thousands of federal workers have been fired and put on leave and are left in limbo. Millions in federal funds have been frozen for our communities. And your private data has been hacked by a group of teenage software hackers at the Department of Treasury. And Elon Musk and Donald Trump are breaking the law daily inside of these agencies. In fact, not only are they breaking the law, they are violating the Constitution, appropriations law, statutory law. There are 55 court cases pending right now in front of federal courts. Federal stays filed by federal judges to stop Trump and Musk from these illegal activities. And Democrats are here on the House floor fighting. We're fighting in the halls of Congress. We're working with our allies on the outside to fight in the courts. And yes, we are fighting in the streets alongside the American people. So where are the Republicans? Have you so abdicated your constitutional responsibility that you can't hold your own party accountable? Just last week, in the Oversight Committee, we asked for Elon Musk to come testify, and when we tried to subpoena him, you went out of your way to stop him from appearing in front of the United States House of Representatives Oversight Committee. If you're so proud of what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing inside of these agencies, then why are you trying so hard to shield them from public scrutiny and appearing in the people's house? Because really, what the hell is going on? That is what the American people want to know. Why are you trampling on their fundamental rights? As millions of Americans are terrified right now across this country, and we know that thousands of your constituents are calling your offices as we speak. Seniors and elders from our communities that are afraid that their Social Security checks aren't going to come. Housing and homeless organizations that are afraid they're going to have to shut down and not be able to give out vouchers so that people have housing. Food banks who are concerned they're not going to have enough funding to get to the end of the month to make sure that families can eat. hospitals and clinics that are wondering if they're going to have to shut down whole parts of their treatment to the public, universities whose funds have been frozen, and state, local, and tribal governments who are continuing to get notifications from the administration that their funding is not coming, even though a court has already ordered Donald Trump more than once that they are violating the law. So where are our Republican colleagues? Why are they pretending like there's nothing to see here? Maybe it's because while we're standing here, they are literally meeting behind closed doors, putting together a tax package that has yet to see the light of day, that will literally make permanent the largest tax breaks for billionaires in the history of this country. That's right. That's what they're up to. That is what they're doing. And you know who those tax breaks are going to go to? They're going to go to people like Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and all the billionaires and millionaires who are serving in the cabinet right now and giving unfettered access to Elon Musk and his software engineers to hack your private data. And how are they going to pay for it? They already told us how they're going to pay for it. They're going to steal your Medicaid and your Medicare, and they're going to do it by illegally shutting down grants and funding for these agencies and for all of the countless services and programs that we know they're hacking this data to do. So we know what they're up to, and our Republicans are acting like there's nothing to see here because they're in on it, guys. That's why they're not here on the floor. That's why they're missing. That's why they're letting Elon Musk and his Silicon Valley buddies raid the federal Treasury. And so we want you to know, the American people, what is actually going on here. And tomorrow, in the very first hearing of the Oversight Committee's new DOJ subcommittee, Democrats are ready to fight. We are ready to show the American people what is actually happening and how we are fighting back to defend and to serve our people, and to reveal what is actually going on, not only in this chamber, but across this town as they try to dismantle our agencies and funding. So I say to the American people, not only are we fighting for you, continue to join us in the fight. We need your voices. We need them loud. We need them clear. Keep calling your Republican representatives. Keep calling us, and let them know not only is this not normal, this is not okay, and we are going to continue to fight for our democracy.
I take it that the gentle lady yields. Thank you very much. And now yield to my friend, Ms. Moore from the great state of Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I took the following oath. It's my 20th year in Congress, and I would like to read it and remind you, Mr. Speaker, of this oath of office. Said, I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose or of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God. This is an oath, Mr. Speaker, that you and I took. Mr. Speaker, this was not an oath that they gave to the Democrats. This was not an oath that they gave just to the Republicans. This was an oath that we all took. And the insurrection continues. You know, the insurrection really started, I think, December 14th, 2020, when all of the electors in various states had put their together and the scheme and the plot to overturn the government started. And then January 6th, 2021, we saw the beginning of the insurrection. 4 years later, we re-elected Donald Trump, and the insurrection continues. It started with just pardoning violent criminals, people who caused the death by suicide and other means of police officers who speared them and caused injuries to police officers, and the insurrection continues. We now have unelected billionaires who have broken into the Treasury Department, and this is not a political grab for power. It's a crime, what they did. It is criminal. And courts have backed this understanding up, and they have said, the Treasury Department, we want you to stop getting people's personal information. Stop getting their Social Security numbers. Stop putting your thumb drives in, taking it off to some laptop, because we don't know what you're doing with this information. And guess what? Elon Musk and our vice president, this is from the day's paper, have said that they should just ignore those court orders. These court orders should not matter, that they should continue to violate the law. You know, I marched into the, Mr. Casten, and I'd like to ask you a few questions, if you don't mind, a colloquy. I marched into our Speaker of the House's office to try to meet with the Treasury Secretary to ask them why they were committing crimes, why there was unchecked authority over Treasury data, to stop doing it, why they needed to do this, why they needed to surveil, penalize, or control this financial access. And the Speaker told me he had no idea what they were doing. The Speaker of the House does not know what they are doing. And this is the same people who have taken the same oath of office that all of us have taken. To have these 19-year-old kids with microwaved, processed security clearances, if they even have that, putting thumb drives in our mainframe. And I'm asking you, Mr. Casten, how does that contribute to, what does your Taxpayer Data Protection Act do to stop that?
The first thing we do is make sure that unless you have a security clearance, a top secret security clearance, you cannot access those records. The second thing it does is says that if you have not been a federal government employee for at least a year, you cannot access those records. You cannot access those records if you are a special government employee, because let's remember, we have to have oversight over the people who are doing this. People need to disclose what their conflicts of interest are, which brings us to the fourth piece. You cannot access those records if you have a conflict of interest. Let's just say, hypothetically, you were running a satellite company that had large contracts with the United States and were also doing business in China, and you might have reason to game that system. That would be a conflict of interest.
Well, okay, so Mr. Casten, let me get this clear. Have any of those conditions been met? Has anybody gotten the appropriate security clearances? Have they told us what they are going to do with it? And what of Article 1? We're Article 1 of the Constitution. Y'all elected us to represent you, 300 million Americans. And the President of the United States says that he does not have to, Mr. Speaker, I realize that I'm not supposed to mention his name. I didn't mention his name. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to associate myself with the words of the gentlelady from New Mexico. This is not normal. We're not having a normal session. Mr. Speaker, the House is on fire. The House is on fire. There is nothing legal or constitutional that is going on. We have unelected billionaires running the country. We have a president who is pardoning violent criminals And I suppose if they ignore the court orders, he'll just have his daily list of people that he'll pardon so they can continue. Mr. Speaker, the House is on fire. The insurrection is continuing, and it's affecting you. Whether you are a Head Start child out there that needs it, whether you're a senior in a nursing home who will get inadequate care, you're going to be laying in your feces for 10 hours because they're cutting Medicaid. Whether you're a farmer who has not gotten your USDA funding, the House is on fire. Whether you're a Social Security recipient and they've gone in and created a back door to your data, they know your bank account number, the House is on fire, y'all. We need to stop acting like things are normal. It is not normal. And I yield back to the gentleman.
Thank you to my friend, Ms. Moore. Yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Turner.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Mr. Speaker, I was, this past weekend was Super Bowl weekend. And of course, I was in my district in Houston, Texas. And I went back to get prepared to go to several events in reference to the Super Bowl. And I thought the number one question that I was going to be asked was, who did I favor? Since the Houston Texans were defeated by Kansas City on its way to the Super Bowl. But all this week, Mr. Speaker, the questions that kept coming back to me was, Congressman Turner, what's happening in D.C.? And what is this about our personal information being in the hands of someone else? From one event to the next, I was stopped and got these questions over and over again. At the Super Bowl party, I guess you could say, again, I thought people would be focused on Kansas City or Philadelphia. But when I arrived, people would come up to me and say, what is this that I'm hearing about my personal information possibly being in the hands of someone else? That is what I had to deal with this entire weekend. And it is an issue that we simply cannot ignore. That someone, let's say in this case, Elon Musk and his team of engineers, would go to the United States Treasury Department and literally take it over and have access to people's Social Security information, Medicare, Medicaid information, their taxpayer information, and the list goes on and on. And this is a payment system that literally processes about $6 trillion on an annual basis. When I came to this Congress as a new member, that was not one of the issues that I thought I would be facing in the first month of being here in this 119th Congress. But it's an issue that I've had to deal with now over and over again. And then the next question that came to me, Mr. Speaker, all right, Congressman Turner, you are there. So what are you all doing to protect our information? What's the next step? What is Congress intending to do? And that was a difficult question to answer. What I did say to people is that many of us are not in agreement with what has taken place over the last few weeks. We did not approve someone coming in, taking over the U.S. Treasury Department, and obtaining your private, confidential information without your consent. So we're standing up and speaking against it. And let me point out, which I think is important, the questions that came to me did not just come from Democrats. The questions were also coming to me from Republicans, moms and dads, people who care about their information when they've heard so much about cybersecurity threats and information being stolen. That is what came to me. For 8 years, Mr. Speaker, I was the mayor of the city of Houston, a nonpartisan position, because as a mayor of a city, potholes are neither Democratic nor Republican. When it rains, it just doesn't fall just on Democratic neighborhoods, it will fall on Republican neighborhoods. So I've had a reputation from trying to call it as I see it, call a ball, and a strike. In this case, when I was at home, I heard from people from all walks of life, from both sides of the aisle, concerned about where their information was going and who had it, and whether or not the people who now have it, whether or not they were sufficiently vetted. I could not say to them that the persons who have your information, who are going through your information, who are using it for whatever purpose, that they have been sufficiently vetted. I can't respond to that. And literally, I can't respond to it because it was an issue that has not been debated on the House floor. But it's an issue that is important to moms and dads and people who are on Social Security and people who are on Medicare and Medicaid, for taxpayers who don't like sharing their information with just anyone. I've been a lawyer for 40 years, and, well, let me just say 40 plus years. And during that time, there are certain things that are just very important for the average person, and their information is that important. My mom, who did not graduate from high school, and I don't say that in a negative sense, because she and my dad raised 9 kids, and I think they did an outstanding job. But my mom, after my dad died, guarded her information very carefully. And a lot of things she would not even share to her kids. And I was a lawyer in the family. But she was always concerned about who had access to her banking accounts, her Social Security numbers, and things of that nature. And right now in America, whether you come from Houston, Texas, or whether you come from California, or you come from Massachusetts or Georgia, people are concerned about who has their personal information. If this issue is so important, then this is an issue that should be debated in the people's house by those of us who are closest to the people that we represent. And that's why I am a strong supporter of the Taxpayer Data Protection Act. Because, Mr. Speaker, when I came here during orientation and the days since, I was reminded that this chamber is the people's house. We represent the folks who are closest to the ones that we speak for and should represent. Now, I am not one who wants to stand up and demonize Elon Musk. I'm not that person. But when Elon Musk steps into this role, and with his team that very few of us have ever met, then he now steps into the arena where we are the ones with the responsibility of safeguarding the American people's interests. And an Elon Musk and his team should not carry any more weight than those of us who have been duly elected and represent the people in this district, in this country. This is an issue, Mr. Speaker, that should be fully debated in this chamber, in the people's house. It is simply that important. And that is why we must immediately debate and pass the Taxpayer Data Protection Act, which will protect our nation's payment system and give hardworking Americans some sense of security. I close by saying this. This is not a partisan issue. It's the people's interest. And throughout all of last year, we talked about what the people wanted, the real issues that affected real people. Nothing hits closer to them than their medical bills, their Social Security information, their taxpayer information. And people should have a right to know who holds that information, what they are doing with it, and how it is being used. Congress has a responsibility here, Mr. Speaker. We cannot abdicate our role. And if we are not allowed to debate it and decide what's in the people's interest, then we may as well go home and allow an Elon Musk and his team to sit in these chairs and make the decision on what happens in our future. That is something that I find unacceptable. And so I am asking for Congress to debate this particular bill, the Taxpayers Data and Protection Act, and allow the people's house to decide who should hold their information, who should have access to it, and how that information should be used. And if we fail to do that as Congress, then we have abdicated our role to speak and represent the people, regardless of what district, regardless of what city or what state. I hope we will not abdicate our role, be you Democrat or Republican. The people need to know that we stand up and represent their interests. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Mr. Speaker, may I ask how much time is remaining?
The gentleman has 18 minutes remaining.
Okay. You know, Joseph Stalin said that one death is a tragedy and a million deaths is a statistic. When we talk about constitutional crises and hacks into $5 trillion systems, that risks sounding like a statistic. I want to share just a couple stories from my district. I represent, like all of us, 1/435th of the population, to understand the real-life consequences that are happening now, first because of what Elon Musk and Donald Trump have done, and second because of the failure of this body to fulfill their oversight role. When these announcements first came through, one of the first calls I got was from a local homeless shelter. They had been almost immediately locked out of their HUD portal. They weren't able to receive any more payments. That means that 200 people in my community who thought they had housing for a cold night in the middle of January were at risk of being put back out on the street. I got a call from a county health department who was wondering if they would be able to fulfill their WIC obligations. These are the payments to women single women often, who have new children, who are trying to make sure that they can get food. They didn't know what to tell these women who relied on them for food and nutrition, whether they would have the resources to keep their children alive. The Department of Health and Human Services who called my office and said that any pause of this legal, congressionally mandated funding could force them to shut down their employment and residential services offered to adults with intellectual and development disabilities. What you do to the least of us, you do unto me, right? 400 people in my district and their families would have been shut out of that critical program. I've heard from almost every single town in my district, mayors, Republican mayors, Democratic mayors, Federalists, Whigs, you name it. They're all calling and asking me whether the federal government will fulfill the obligations that they have underway for bridge repair, road repair, rail grade separations. They're wondering if they should continue those projects and potentially shift the risk onto their constituents. What do they do if they don't have the borrowing capacity? If they have to shut down the project, can they finish it? Because it'll probably raise the costs. This is all being done by a White House that claims to be pursuing financial efficiency. We had a local organization that provides victims of domestic and sexual violence with legal counseling. They have about 2,000 survivors they serve each year. They said, we're going to have to immediately scale back our services and potentially close down entirely. We're getting calls from people saying, if a billionaire is so intent on cutting their access to Social Security, what happens? What happens to their health payments? I had a woman call me who was a decent, kind, hardworking person asking me if she should even bother paying her taxes this year because it's clear that Elon and Donald are dodging theirs. It's clear that they're defunding the enforcement agencies that would an audit. And they're asking why they should even trust a Trump-led Treasury Department with that information. These people are not limited to my district. They're not limited to people who voted for Kamala Harris. This hack affects every single one of us. 3 patriotic Americans, Republicans, is all we need. Yield to my friend, the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan.
Thank you. And Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the Taxpayer Data Protection Act, but before then, I will hold this piece of paper up for just a little while, because it's my anticipation that before I finish speaking, that the internet will have transcribed this piece of paper and the data that is in it. Mr. Speaker, what if I told you somewhere in the multiverse, there was a person, dare I say a villain, who was intent on accessing all of the data of the world's most powerful nation and of all of her people. Imagine him sitting in his lair, perhaps he's stroking a cat, and in his mind's eye, he envisions the files of data that he and his minions will soon have access to. Perhaps he will have access to your Social Security number, or perhaps to your health information. Perhaps he will know about your financial status or what you buy. Or perhaps he'll unilaterally refuse payments to defense programs or take a cut of his own from payments. Or even he'll only authorize contracts to his very favorite people and his very favorite organizations. He will also know deeper secrets that our government works so hard to make sure remain so that our citizens can be protected. And so will our adversaries have those same secrets, either intentionally or unintentionally. You would probably really enjoy this scenario if it were the plot to the new 007 movie. But imagine if it wasn't just a plot, and that it was instead a reality. This is in fact what President Elon Musk and his unelected and unvetted and untrained minions are attempting to accomplish. Elon Musk is not rooting around in our Treasury data so he can find fraud and waste. He does not care about curbing or spending or getting the budget balanced. He is not trying to optimize our nation's wealth or to help us all make smarter choices. He never cared about any of this stuff, and he never will. And yet, knowing this, Trump has in fact set him loose on the hunt, to hunt for data. And make no mistake about that, he is attempting, and if he is not already yet, to access this cache of information, both the personal and the national interest information of our entire people and our entire nation that will forever be his and his minions and at their disposal forever should they be successful. And my guess is by now the internet has already translated this piece of paper into data, because that's the way the internet works. That is not a read-only piece of data. You may have been able to read it, but in that space of time, my guarantee is that someone on the internet has not only translated it, but also is now spinning it into different directions and thoughts. This all should strike fear in the hearts of all Americans for all kinds of different reasons. It's a blatant and overt theft of information that is not theirs to have. Think of the power that that information will wield. It is a violation of our Constitution and of the checks and balances that we all grew up honoring, regardless of what party that we associate ourselves with. So what is a person to do? A person has to think hard about how they feel about the means and the ends. You may be one of those people who believes that this government needs to be held in check. You may have voted for this. I do understand. But is this in fact the way that you want this to be accomplished? You should be concerned that the law is being broken in your name. You may be one of the people in the middle who fears that your information will be used against you and just now is waking up and realizing that this may not be exactly what you want. You should also be outraged and concerned. And if you're one of those people who never signed up for this to begin with, I am truly sorry. But we are in a situation right now where the House, the Senate, and the White House are all under Republican control. And so we need all of you, all three different kinds of you, to tell us to do our jobs. So what does doing our job looks like? It looks like supporting this bill that's on the floor, the Taxpayer Data Protection Act. What it looks like is passing this bill on the floor with a resounding majority and making sure, a la Schoolhouse Rock, that it goes to the Senate as well, and making sure that it gets to the president's desk with a veto-proof majority. What it looks like is stopping the executive orders and the actions of the executive, Trump, so that this kind of thing cannot continue to happen. The legislative branch, us, but really specifically the Republican majority today, are the only ones who can put a stop to this dangerous lawlessness. But they're not going to do that, even though they will privately acknowledge how wrong it is, even though they privately hope that Musk and Trump will wear themselves out, even though they privately hope the courts will work, and even though they privately say it's read-only access and it's not that much data. It is dangerous, and it is unconstitutional, and it is illegal. So I would ask, step up and speak up, my friends. Please continue to call your congressmen, particularly your Republican ones, and I yield back. Thank you.
I yield to my friend, Mr. Kennedy from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of the Taxpayer Data Protection Act, and I thank Congresswoman Stevens and Congressman Casten for introducing this important legislation. The American people deserve a government that protects their most sensitive personal information, instead of one that allows an unelected billionaire to rifle through it. The Treasury Secretary shirked his duty and granted Elon Musk and his so-called Department of Government Efficiency access to Treasury payment systems. This isn't efficiency. It's an outright betrayal of the public's trust. Under this guise of efficiency, however, this administration has handed over Social Security and Medicare beneficiaries' private data to a billionaire with no oversight and endless ways to profit. Make no mistake, this is not about improving government operations. It's about consolidating power in the hands of the few at the expense of hardworking families, at the expense of 167,000 Western New Yorkers in my district who rely on Social Security benefits, and the 335,000 taxpayers in my district who file tax returns every year. Fortunately, attorneys general from New York and 18 other states sued, and the judges blocked Elon Musk's access. The Taxpayer Protection Act will prevent any unelected billionaire from having unlawful access to private and sensitive data. This bill will restore proper safeguards for the Treasury and ensure that no administration can hand over control of taxpayer data to an unelected, unvetted, and unqualified billionaire. We will not stand by as our institutions are auctioned off for the rich to profit at the expense of hardworking families. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join me in defending the well-being and security of the people we were all elected to represent. I yield back.
Yield now to the Assistant Democratic Leader, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, let me say thank you to my colleague, Representative Casten, and Representative Stevens as well, for their leadership, courage of convictions in taking on this important legislative effort. Over the past 3 weeks, America has watched with alarm as President Trump and his administration continue to throw the federal government into chaos, slashing funding for a variety of different programs, unlawfully attempting to freeze federal programs, ultimately, in my view, taking steps that are unconstitutional and inconsistent with the values of the American public. My office has been inundated in particular with calls from constituents who are deeply troubled and concerned, Mr. Speaker, about what is happening at the Treasury Department. The Trump administration has placed an unelected billionaire and his associates in extreme areas of power, giving them access to Americans' most sensitive information. Americans are outraged. They are right to be outraged. The good news, Mr. Speaker, is we have a legislative response that would ameliorate this particular challenge. And that is the bill that Representative Casten and Representative Stevens have introduced, the Taxpayer Data Protection Act. It's a simple bill, a straightforward proposition that your data, Mr. Speaker, your Social Security number and identifying information, just as every American's, should be protected. One would think that that would be something that every member of this body could agree upon. And yet, we've been unable to convince a Republican colleague, a colleague from the other side of the aisle, to join this effort. We only need 3, Mr. Speaker, 3 Republicans who decide to do the right thing, to stand up for the American taxpayer, to protect their data. If 3 join Mr. Casten and Ms. Stevens, we can get this bill across the finish line. House Democrats will certainly continue to do everything in our power to achieve that outcome. I thank the representative from Illinois for his leadership and for continuing to make the clarion call to the American people about this particular issue.
Mr. Nagus, I want to comment quickly because some people have said that this bill is unnecessary because what's being done by the White House is simply going after waste, fraud, and abuse. I want to explain why that's actually the opposite of what they're doing. But first, we've got to clarify, all of us in this body are the fiscal custodians of our nation's wealth. To allow corruption or waste to persist is to squander the taxpayers' hard-earned money. We're all aligned on that issue. And second, I'd note that while we've certainly had our share of financial scandals and corruption over our history, they've almost always involved the illegal transfer of wealth from the government to the private sector, from patronage jobs to no-bid contracts to inflated hotel rates for Secret Service agents at the Trump Hotel. There's a pattern there. And the easy proof of that is that while our nation seems to have a lot of billionaires lately, you won't find them among our country's TSA workers, air traffic controllers, food inspectors, IRS agents, soldiers, intelligence officers, or the numerous other people who have dedicated their life to public service, which makes sense. Those of us in public service have chosen to live lives of elevated public scrutiny. A free press keeps tabs on us. Inspectors general and whistleblowers exist to ensure that grift and fraud are caught quickly. So if the Trump administration were genuinely concerned about waste, fraud, and abuse, what would they do that would be consistent with existing law? That's pretty easy. They'd submit budget requests to Congress increasing funding for inspectors general and whistleblower protections. They'd notify Congress of specific areas where they believe this abuse is happening, ask us to pass laws to close loopholes, increase funding for enforcement. They'd use their bully pulpit to strengthen the rule of law and to remind everybody that there is a higher ethical standard to live to and to demonstrate by their behavior that they live by that standard and demand it of others. That's the exact opposite of everything they've done. They failed to submit budgets. They've ignored Congress's congressional power of the purse, putting spending decisions in the hands of economically connected oligarchs. They've fired or are threatening to fire inspectors general and whistleblower advocates, making it harder for ethical federal employees to call out fraud when they see it. They're firing FBI and other law enforcement officers who could prosecute those crimes, including ones who have active cases ongoing. They seem to have a specific bias, I would note, against FBI officers who are prosecuting waste, fraud, and abuse against the Trump family. They're pardoning people who assaulted police officers and sending a message to the American people that ethics don't even matter. If you ignore the law, you can ignore the orders of the court, according to J.D. Vance, because we are now living in a, quote, post-congressional era, according to OMB Director Russ Vaught. And they are doing that while giving access to the federal payment system to people who are not cleared and massively conflicted. What they are doing is a case study in how to expand, perpetuate, and get away with waste, fraud, and abuse. And a Congress that fulfilled its obligation to act as a check and balance on the executive branch would put a stop to that immediately. May I ask how much time is remaining?
The gentleman has 1 minute.
I yield the remaining time to Mr. Takano of California.
Thank you for yielding. Mr. Speaker, if you were approached on the street by a stranger and asked for your Social Security number, your home address, or your bank account information, you would say no. So when the government asks for this information in order to process Social Security checks or tax refunds, Americans say yes because there's an expectation of privacy and trust. They trust that their information won't fall into the hands of bad actors. They trust that their information will be secure with people who are qualified, vetted, and who have been proven worthy to have access to your sensitive data. But this administration has allowed this trust to be broken. I was quick to co-sponsor the Taxpayer Data Protection Act to protect the nation's payment system from reckless and unlawful interference. It would require anyone that is accessing this system has a reliable track record of professional service, has the necessary security clearance, and has made an ethics commitment and has no conflicts of interest. I will note that the New York Times reports that Elon Musk will make no public disclosure of any conflicts of interest in his financial disclosures. I yield back, sir.